Let's move ahead to the income effect. Then we move on to the substitution effect. We'll also talk about the angel curve. We will also talk about Slutsky, Hicks, a lot of things in this video itself, most probably. Let's begin with the income effect, the income consumption curve. With a given money income to spend on goods, given price of the two goods, and given an indifference map, the consumers will be in equilibrium at a point in an indifference map. We are now interested in knowing how the consumer will react in regards to his purchase of the goods when his money income changes. Prices of the goods and his taste and preferences remain unchanged. Income effect shows the reaction of the consumer. Thus, income effect means a change in consumers' purchases of the goods as a result of change in the money income, of course. So if you're talking about the income effect, we are talking about if the income of a particular consumer goes on to change, what are the effects that we're going to see on his purchases of the goods. With the given prices and given money income as indicated in the budget line P1L1, the consumer is initially at equilibrium on point Q1. On the indifference curve, IC1 is having OM1 of X and ON1 of Y. Okay, this quantity at Q1. Now suppose that the income of the consumer increases. With this increased income, he would be able to purchase larger quantities of both goods. As a result, the budget line will shift upward and will be parallel to the original budget line P1L1. Okay, let's say we move on to P2L2. Okay, increased the consumer income is now increased by L1 L2. This is the change in the income of the consumer in terms of X, or P1 P2 in terms of Y. Okay, and now we're going to and now we'll be buying OM2 level of good X and ON2 level of good Y. Okay, similarly you can check for changes as income keeps on increasing till point P4. If now various points Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4 showing consumers equilibrium at various levels of incomes are joined, this is called income consumption curve. If you join the equilibrium points reached caused by a change in income of a particular consumer, it's called the income consumption curve. Income consumption curve is thus the locus of equilibrium points at various levels of consumers' income. Income consumption curve traces out the income effect on the quantity consumed of the goods. Income effect can either be positive or negative. Income effect for a good is said to be positive when there's an increase in the income of the consumer. His consumption of the good also increases. This is an underline worthy point. It could be positive or negative. So if there's an increase in the income uh, of the consumer, his consumption is also going to increase, and this is going to give a positive income effect. This is normal. This is a normal goods case when the income effect of both the goods presented in the two axes of the figure is positive. The income consumption curve will slope upwards to the right. Okay, if the income effect of both goods represented in the two axes is positive, the ICC is going to slope upwards and to the right. Okay, like this, upwards and to the right. If this is a normal goods case, by the way. Only the upward sloping income consumption curves can show rising consumption of two goods as income increases. However, for some goods, income effect is negative. Income effect for a good is said to be negative when, with the increase in income, the consumer reduces his consumption of the good. So, as we said, income effect can be both positive and negative. With the negative income effect, what that means is that with an increase in income, the consumer is going to consume less of that good. Such good for which income effect is negative is called inferior goods. Okay, this is because the income whose consumption the goods whose consumption falls as the income of the consumer rises are considered to be way inferior by the consumer, and therefore he substitutes superior goods for them when the income rises. When With the increase in his income, the consumer begins to consume superior goods. The consumption of quantity purchased by him of these goods which are often more expensive. Hence, as they become richer and can afford to buy more expensive goods, they switch the consumption of superior and better quality goods. For instance, jowar, bajra, all of this. they reduce its consumption and use desi ghee instead. Okay. So the richer goods basically. So whatever you need to, okay, in case of inferior goods, indifference map would be such as to yield income consumption curve which either slopes backward, okay, uh, that is towards the left, or downwards, uh, as in this case. Okay, it would be noticed from these two figures that income effect becomes negative only after a point. Okay, so first it was increasing and then started to fall, so it's becoming negative, negative, negative. It signifies that only at higher ranges of income some goods become inferior goods, and up to a point their consumption behaves like a normal good. So goods might not always begin to be inferior goods. They might become inferior after a certain point. Let's say if your monthly income is 100 rupees and you buy, let's say, jowar, instead of wheat, okay, then uh, if let's say if your income increases to 200, you still need to buy jowar. You still do not have enough money to be able to allocate to wheat and rice, okay. But let's say your income rises to 400 rupees. At that point you think, yes, I can allocate enough money for wheat and rice, okay. So after a certain point those goods start to become inferior goods. You can read into this, it explains this process. Okay, same kind of process explained for Q2. But normal goods can be either necessities or luxuries depending upon whether the quantity purchased of the goods by the consumer increase less than or more than proportionately to the increase in income. If the quantity purchased of a commodity rises less than proportionately to the increase in the consumer's income, the commodity is called as a necessity. Okay, so if the quantity purchase of the commodity rises less than proportionately to the increase in the consumer's income, that time it is just a necessity. On the other hand, if the quantity purchase of a commodity increases more than proportionately to the increase in income, it's called a luxury, because that good would cost so much more. It's a luxury. The slope of the income consumption curve ICC1 is increasing, which implies that the quantity purchased of commodity X increases less than proportionately to the increase in consumers' income. Therefore, in this case, ICC1, good X is a necessity and good Y is a luxury. Okay, why necessity could probably increase less proportionately? Because it was a necessity. You had to buy the amount of that good even when you had less money, and as your income rises, the consumption of that good is not going to rise, because you already were consuming it as much as you needed to. It was a necessity, so it does not exactly depend on income effect at all. Therefore, in the case of ICC1, good X is a necessity, good Y is a luxury. On the other hand, the slope of income consumption curve ICC3 is is decreasing, which implies the quantity purchase of good X increases more than proportionately to the increase in the income, and therefore, in this case, good X is a luxury and good Y is a necessity. Okay, this case. Okay, X is a luxury. Okay, so because the change is more than proportionately for this good. It will be seen from 8.31 that the income consumption curve ICC2 is a linear curve passing through the origin, which implies that the increase in the quantities purchased of both the goods is rising in proportion to the increase in the income, and therefore necessity good is a luxury. Sorry, neither good is a luxury or a necessity. Basically, this can be used to understand or to use a mind map for checking what increase and decrease, because this is equal to the case of equal to um, proportion with the increase in income. Okay, if income effect is positive for both X and Y, the income consumption curve will slope upward and to the right. If for both of the goods it is uh, positive, then the income consumption curve will slope upwards and to the right, like we saw in 8.28, this one. Okay, if both of the goods are have a positive income effect. Okay, but upward sloping income consumption curve to the right of for various goods may be different slopes as shown in 8.31, right, in which income consumption curves with varying slopes are all sloping upwards and therefore indicating that both goods are normal goods having positive income effect. If income effect for good X is negative, income consumption curve will slope backward to the left as ICC dash or ICC uh, dash in figure 8.3 to this one. Okay, so income effect for good X is negative. So income, so basically X is an inferior. Okay, uh, so we are going to have a backward bending ICC curve. If good Y happens to be an inferior, the income consumption curve will bend back towards X axis. Okay, this way. Okay, in figures 8.31 and 8.32, various possible shapes which income consumption curve can take are shown bereft of the indifference curves and budget lines which yield them. It may be, however, pointed out that given an indifference map and a set of budget lines, there will be one income consumption curve. A noteworthy point is that it is not the indifference curves which explain why a good happens to be an inferior goods. In other words, indifference curves do not explain why income effects for a good is negative. Indifference curve can only just illustrate the inferior good phenomena. We've already seen the inferior good phenomena, but the ICs cannot explain why income effect for a good is negative. Okay, income consumption curve ICCs that we've been studying till now, and the angel curve. The indifference curve map income consumption curve as a locus of the equilibrium quantities consumed by the individual at different level of his income. We've seen this. Thus, the ICC can be used to derive the relationship between the level of consumer's income and the quantities purchased by a commodity by him, right? So, what are we seeing in this is a relationship between the level of consumer's income. So, as income increases or decreases or whatever, and the quantity purchased of commodity, because on the x and y axis we're basically showing the commodities that a particular person is purchasing. Okay, so we're showing the relationship between the income and the quantities purchased of that good according to the income. In 19th century German statistician Ernest Angel made an empirical study of family budgets to draw conclusions about the patterns of consumption expenditure, that is expenditure on different goods and services by the household at different levels of income. The conclusion he arrived at are still believed to be generally valid. According to Angel's analysis, as the income of a family increases, the proportion of income spent on necessities such as food falls, and that spent on luxuries increases. In other words, the poor families spend relatively large proportion of their income on necessities, whereas rich families spend a relatively large part of their income on luxuries. This change in the pattern of consumption expenditure, that is, decline in the proportion of income spent on food and other necessities, and increase in the proportion of income spent on luxuries with the rise in income of the families, has been called the Angel's Law. So, what he's saying is that as you become richer and richer, the amount of money that you spend from your income on the proportion of income that you spend on food and other necessities basically falls, because it starts to become less and less uh, part of the income that you're earning as you keep on earning more and more, and the amount of or the proportion of income that you spend on luxuries increases. Though Angel dealt with the relationship between income and expenditure on different goods, in order to keep our analysis simple, we will describe and explain the relationship between income and quantities purchased of goods. However, both types of relationships will convey the same information about the individual's consumption behavior as in our analysis of Angel's curve. The prices of goods are held constant. The curve showing the relationship between the levels of income and quantity purchase of particular commodities has therefore been called the Angel curve. So, the curve that shows the relationship between the level of income and quantity purchase of particular commodities is essentially called the Angel's curve. In what follows, we will explain how an angel curve is derived from income consumption curve. In our analysis of the angel curve, we can relate quantity purchase of commodity rather than expenditure on it to the level of consumers' income. It is worth noting that the demand curve depicting relationship between price and quantity purchased, other factors remaining the same, angel curve shows a relationship between income and quantity demanded. So, uh, when the demand curve is depicting the relationship between price and quantity purchased, angel curve will show the relationship between price and quantity, sorry, income and quantity demanded. Other influence on quantity purchase, such as price of goods, consumer preferences, are assumed to be constant. For deriving angel curve from the income consumption curve, we plot levels of income on the y-axis and quantity purchased of a commodity on the x-axis. Level of income on the y-axis, quantity purchase of commodity on the x-axis. In 8.33, given the indifference map representing the preferences of the consumer and the price of two goods X and Y, ICC is the income consumption curve showing the equilibrium quantities purchase of commodities by the consumer as his income increases from 300 to 400 to 500 per day. So we're basically able to show the ICCs relating to rupees 300 being earned, 4 and 500 being earned when quantity X and quantity Y are plotted here. Okay, it will be seen from panel A that when income is 300 given price of X and X and Y, the consumer is buying OQ1 level of X. Okay, we can see a purchase of OQ1 of X. Okay, in panel B, in which level of income is represented on the vertical axis and quantity purchase of the commodity X is on the Y axis, we directly plot quantity OQ1 against the level of income 300. Okay, so trying to plot the angel curve, we have this OQ1 here, and parallel to it we have the income at which this OQ1 was being bought, which is rupees 300, right? As income increases to rupees 400, price of goods remain constant. The budget line in panel A shifts outward and to the left to the new position B2 L2, with which the consumer is in equilibrium at point S and the consumer buys OQ2 quantity of good X. So the budget line is moving out, B2 L2, we have another level, another point on the tangent of the budget line, and I see point S which is in equilibrium, and now you are buying OQ2 level of commodity X. Against the OQ2 level of commodity X, you will plot 400, and you keep on plotting until you get all the points together to draw EC, which is the angel curve. Okay, this equilibrium points contributing to the income consumption curve in the consumer's indifference map have been transformed into angel curve depicting quantity income relationship. Each point of an angel curve corresponds to the relevant point of income consumption curve. Thus, R dash of the angel curve corresponds curve EC corresponds to point R on the ICC curve. Angel curve for normal goods is upward sloping, which shows that as income increases, consumers buy more of a commodity. The slope of the angel curve EC drawn in panel B of figure 8.33 equals delta M by delta Q, where delta M stands for change in income and delta Q is for change in the quantity demanded of the good X. Okay. It is important to note that the slope of the angel curve in 8.33 panel B increases as income increases. You see that the slope keeps on increasing. It just keeps on increasing as it slides, it slopes upward and upward. Okay. This indicates that with every equal increase in income, expansion of quantity purchase of the goods successfully declines. This upward sloping angel curve with increasing slope as income rises depicts a case of necessities. So it is clear, since we talked about necessities already, it's clear that this should be the case of necessities, consumption of which increases relatively less as compared to income rise, right? Income is initially rupees 300 M1 per week. The quantity purchase of the good X is equal to OQ1, and when income rises by 100 to 400 M2 per week, he increases his consumption to OQ2, that is by quantity Q1 Q2. Now when his income per week further increases by rupees 100 to 500 per week, the quantity consumed increases to OQ3, that is by Q2 Q3, right? By Q2 Q3. Now as income increases from 400 to 500, the consumption also increases by Q2 Q3, which is less than Q1 Q2. If you're able to see, this area is greater than this area. Okay, that's what we are saying, that when income increases, the amount of, or the proportion of it spent on necessity goods keeps on decreasing. Thus, an angel curve drawn in panel B of 8.33, quantity purchase of the commodity increases with the increase in income but at a decreasing rate. This is for necessities. Angel curve drawn for 8.34 is upward sloping curve but is concave. This implies that the slope of angel curve is declining with the increase in income. You see it steeper, 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 plateau. That is the angel curve of a commodity depicted in figure 8.34. The equal increments in income result in successively larger increase in the quantity purchased of the commodity. At income of 300, the consumer purchased OQ1 quantity of the commodity. Increase in income by 100 to 400 results in increase in quantity purchased of the commodity equal to Q1 Q2. Okay, and you see Q3 Q2 Q3, which is movement from 400 to 500, the same level of increase, you see 100 and 100, but here it's not the same. Here the increase is more. Okay, so we get a concave angel curve. It implies that a consumer becomes richer. As the consumer becomes richer, he purchases relatively more of the commodity, and such commodities are luxuries. In case of inferior goods, consumption of the commodity declines as the income increases. Angel curve of the inferior good is drawn here, which is backward bending, indicating a fall in the quantity purchase of the good as income increases. Okay, as income keeps on increasing, the quantity, first the quantity was Q1, next the quantity is Q double dash, and next the quantity is Q triple dash. Okay, an extreme case of angel curve is a vertical straight line as drawn in figure 8.36. This represents a case of neutral commodity which is quite unresponsive to the increase in income. Okay, when there is absolutely no response with respect to increase in income, it is called a neutral commodity. It's a vertical shaped angel curve that a person goes on consuming the same amount of a commodity whatever the level of income. For example, salt purchased by the family remains the same, determined as it is by food habits which are increase in the income, which cause an increase in the income. Let us now move on to the substitution effect. We have explained above the effect of changes in income on purchases or consumption of a good. Another important factor responsible for the change in consumption of a good is the substitution effect, whereas the income effect shows a change in quantity purchase of a good by a consumer. As a result of change in income, prices of goods remaining constant. Substitution effect means a change in quantity purchase of a good as a consequence of the change in its relative price alone. real income or level of satisfaction remaining constant. Okay, so because the price is changing, here we're keeping the price, taste and preference, level of satisfaction, all of that constant, just increasing or decreasing the income. Whereas in substitution effect, you keep the income constant as well, whereas you change the price. When the price of a good changes, he goes on to a different IC and his level of satisfaction changes. The consumer goes on to a different IC as a result of the change in price, because with this real income or purchasing power of a consumer also changes. We'll see how we've already seen a bit of it in previous chapters. To keep the real income of the consumer constant so that the effect due to change in relative price alone may not be known, price change is compensated by a simultaneous increase in income. For example, when price of a good, let's say X, falls, real income of the consumer would increase and he would be in equilibrium at a higher IC, showing a higher level of satisfaction. When the price of a good, say X, falls, real income of the consumer would increase, right? Because if the price of a consumer is falling, you have more money in your hands, even when the income has not really changed. Okay, this is called real income rising, and he would be in equilibrium at a higher IC, showing a higher level of satisfaction. I hope that makes sense. In order to find out the substitution effect, that is change in the quantity of X purchased, which has come about due to change only in the relative price, the consumer's money income must be reduced by an amount that cancels out the gains in real income that result from decrease in price. Okay. Uh, Now, two slightly different concepts of substitution effect have been developed by J.R. Hicks and the other one by E. Slutsky. These two concepts of substitution effect have been named after their authors. Thus, the substitution effect, which is propounded by Hicks and Allen, is called the Hicksian substitution effect, and that developed by Slutsky is called the Slutsky substitution effect. The two effects differ in regard to the magnitude of change in money income which could be affected so as to neutralize the change in real income of the consumer, which results from a change in price. We shall see here the Hicksian substitution effect. First, we'll see the Hicksian substitution effect. I think Slutsky is not a part of this chapter. It has to be read separately. We'll see. In the Hicksian substitution effect, price change is accompanied by so much change in money income that the consumer is neither better off nor worse off than before. So, what we do in Hicksian substitution effect is that price change is accompanied by so much change in money income that the consumer is neither better off nor worse off than before. Okay, that is, he is brought to the original level of satisfaction. The original level of satisfaction is brought he's brought back to that level of satisfaction. In other words, money income of the consumer is changed by an amount which keeps the consumer on the same indifference curve on which he was before the change in price. Is a better definition. I'd say you mark this. Okay, so money income of the consumer is changed by an amount which keeps the consumer on the same IC on which he was before the change in the price, keeping him on the same IC uh, on which he was before the income change. The amount by which the money income of the consumer is changed so that the consumer is neither better off nor worse off than before is called the compensating variation in income. In other words, compensating variation in income is a change in the income of the consumer which is just sufficient to compensate the consumer for a change in the price of a good. Okay. Thus, in Hicksian type of substitution effect, income is changed by the magnitude of compensating variation in income, right? Compensating variation we already read. With the given money income and given prices of the two goods as represented by the budget line PL, the consumer is in equilibrium at point Q on the indifference curve and is purchasing OM of good X and ON of good Y. Okay, OM of good X and ON of good Y. Suppose that the price of the good X falls. Okay, so that the budget line now shifts to the to PL dash. Okay, first the budget line was PL, The first budget line was PL. Okay. Now what happens is the price of good X, this good X has fallen. Okay, so now you can basically buy more of that good. Okay, you can buy more of that good. So with respect to that particular good, again we've seen this already in the income effect and the shifts in curves. uh, what you can do is you can basically shift to this level. mm. Okay, terrible, terrible, terrible. Okay. Okay, which is PL dash. With the fall in price effects, the consumer's real income or purchasing power would increase. Okay, the purchasing power increase is basically what is shown in these in these shifts in budget lines. In order to find out the substitution effect, the gain in real income should be wiped out. Now, we should wipe out the entire gain in income effect because gain in income, real income, because that is what income effect shows. So, we don't need to show that here, we just want the substitution effect. Okay, so the real income gain should be wiped out by reducing the money income of the consumer by such an amount that forces him to remain on the same IC. So we basically want him to be on the same IC, so we need to wipe out the income effect. Okay. When some money is taken away from the consumer to cancel out the gain in real income, then the budget line which shifted to position PL dash will now shift downward but be parallel to PL dash. Okay. In figure 8.37, a budget line AB parallel to PL dash has been drawn at such a distance from PL dash that it touches the indifference curve IC, because we still want him to have the same level of satisfaction that he did before. We want the new budget line to be parallel to PL dash because, oh my god. Okay, I'm terrible at this. I'm so sorry. Uh, so we want him to okay, so we want the slope of the budget line to still be the same as the new increase in income is causing, but because we want his satisfaction to remain the same, we are going to shift, we are going to wipe out that income effect through this and then keep it on the same satisfaction level, so on the same very IC. Okay, it means that reduction in consumers income by the amount PA or L dash B has been made so as to keep him on the same indifference curve. PA or L dash B is thus just sufficient to cancel out the gain in real income which occurred due to the fall in the price of X. PA or L dash B is therefore compensating variation in income. Okay, this is this PA or L dash B, sorry, yeah, this level. Okay, this was the real income increase. Basically these levels were increased due to these levels are brought back to compensate uh, the variation in income. Now budget line AB represent the new relative prices of goods X and Y since it is parallel to the budget line PL dash. Okay, since it's parallel to the budget line PL dash, um, it's representing the new relative price of goods X and Y, uh, uh, which was obtained when the price of good X is fallen. In comparison to the budget line PL, X is now relatively cheaper, right? X is now relatively cheaper as compared to this budget line. X is now relatively cheaper. The consumer would therefore rearrange his purchase of X and Y and will substitute X for Y. So he would want more of X than he did before, right? That is, since X is now relatively cheaper and Y is now relatively dearer than before, he would buy more of X and less of Y. So level of satisfaction is going to remain the same, but he would buy more of X and less of Y. It will be seen in figure 8.37. But a lower money income PL, since the consumer's income is now reduced by compensating variation of income. It will be seen from 8.37 that with the budget line AB, the consumer is in equilibrium at point T and is now buying OM uh, dash level of X and ON dash level of Y. Okay, which is for X it is greater because X is now cheaper, and for Y it is less because Y is now dearer. Thus, in order to buy X more, he moves on to the same indifference curve IC dash to from a point Q to point T. This increase in the quantity purchase of good X by mm dash and the decrease in quantity by nn dash, this amount mm dash and nn dash, it's clear that as a result of Hicksian substitution effect, the consumer remains on the same IC. He is, however, in equilibrium at a different point from that at which he was before the change in the price of good X. The less the convexity of the indifference curve, the greater will be the substitution effect. This is a nice observation. The less the convexity of the indifference curve, the greater will be the substitution effect. As is known, the convexity of the curve is less as the case of the goods which are good substitutes. Okay. It is thus clear that the substitution effect in case of goods good substitutes will be large. It is clear that a fall in the relative price of a commodity always leads to an increase in the quantity demanded due to the substitution effect, the consumer satisfaction or indifference curve remaining the same. Thus, the substitution effect is always negative. This is a very, very important uh, observation. The negative substitution effect implies the relative price of a commodity and its quantity demanded change in opposite directions. We already know this, that is, the decline in relative price of a commodity always causes an increase in the quantity demanded. It is this negative substitution effect which lies on the root of the famous law of demand, stating inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded. The other substitution effect, namely the Slutsky, should be here. Okay. Uh, this is, although a rarely used method, I would see if we can read into this in a later chapter. Till then, I suggest you have a look at whatever we studied today, because the income and substitution effects, also the Hicksian um, substitution effect, is all of these are extremely important and must be read into so as to be able to answer questions in CUET PG, because you definitely can get questions from this chapter, especially uh, the discussed topics. Thank you so much.